today we are coming to you from the Ipswich Waterfront. Absolutely beautiful part of the town, and although this is relatively new because of all the redevelopment, it certainly has remained any less important. It's very rich in history. The Port of Ipswich has been the centre of trade both nationally and internationally since the late 6th century, and although both the port and the town couldn't operate without each other, they also operate quite independently and they both have their own characters indeed. So we're going to go off and explore. I tell you a little bit about the old and the new as we go. I'm going to put my sunglasses on because I realise I'm squinting here, and let you know about the Port of Ipswich, which is one of the oldest towns in England. It grew up in the Anglo-Saxon times during the 7th century. He is said to be the king in the ship's burial ground there. So come take a stroll with me. Let's see what we find. What an absolutely lovely place to start a walk today at the waterfront in Ipswich. The name Ipswich was originally Gipswick, which took its name from the River Gips, with the suffix derived from the Scandinavian term Vik. That evolved from the term meaning bay or inlet, landing place, where merchants could unload their goods. The wharf was in operation from a bend in the River Orwell. The importance of the wharf and the town that grew around it has been recognised through major excavation that has taken place over the past 50 years. The town extended 52 hectares and was later enclosed by Viking ramparts, which made it one of the largest new early post-Roman townships and emporia in Northern Europe. There have been finds of imported pottery and timber barrels from Germany and finds of continental coinage. It shows trade from the Rhine, Domburg, Dorstad and Andernach as part of the Anglo-Saxon engagement in England, with Frisian, Frankish, Almanaic, Saxon, Thuringian, Burgundian worlds. All of this in our little town. How lucky are we? And we just walk around the town oblivious to these facts for the most part. You can see that docked here is the red sail barge, the Thalata, and that's docked ready to go out on day sails. The important Ipswich ware pottery industry established in the town's northeast quarter, probably late 7th century, and that reflected Frisian prototypes, which suggests it may have been established by migrant workers. I do cover that in another walk, which you can find on YouTube. The Gipswick Dock was the trade capital of the East Anglian Kingdom, situated close to its royal centre at Rendlesham and Sutton Hoo. I'm going to turn and give you a view of some of the new architecture in the town. As you can see, these ports have really established themselves over the years. During the 7th and 8th centuries, the two greatest ports were York, Ipswich and London, and two principal new ports were Ipswich in the east and Hamwick, Southampton, in the south. Both Hamwick and Ipswich docks were therefore a point of departure and arrival for continental travel. We'll continue on. The early waterfront of Ipswich ran from approximately St Peter's Church, close to Stoke Bridge, eastward behind the present quay or marina embankment and past the present custom house, which we'll see along this walk this morning. This building here is dedicated to the late James Hare, who was Chief Executive of Ipswich Borough Council. The early waterfront lay nearer to the line of College Street and Salthouse Street, with new revetments being built successfully further down into the river to allow enough depth for the ships to moor, as early embankments became very silted. Medieval waterfront construction was found by excavation during the 21st century works to demolish the old industrial waterfront and showed footings of many projecting boardwalks. And you can see in the distance the old maltings, which have now been converted into offices. And I have been inside these buildings for meetings over the years, and they have been completed beautifully. The original crossing was a ford east of Stoke Bridge, linking Great Whip Street on the south side with Foundation Street to the north, which branched into Lower Brook Street. The area north of the road, between St Peter's Church and St Mary's at Quay, and east of that, is said to represent the site of the Anglo-Saxon industrial waterfront development. Its first urban settlement extended north to Falcon Street, the old cattle market, Dog's Head Street and Tackett Street, with burial grounds on rising grounds in the north. I do cover this in another walk. There is actually a cold case file on Ipswich Man, and that was presented on BBC Two some while ago. It's not too widely available now, but you may be able to find it or even excerpts of it on YouTube, as most things seem to be available there. If I can find it and I'm able to grab a link, I will add it into the video. It does show the excavation. This is Neptune Marina, where lots of people bring their boats into dry dock. There's quite a few vessels moored here, as you can see. People do love to come to Ipswich. We'll continue on. Stoke Bridge was likely created in the 8th century, which established the importance of St Peter's and the routes to the Butter Market and Cornhill in the line of the prehistoric road, which is now called Westgate Street, Tavern and Carr Streets. If you look straight ahead between the buildings, that's where Stoke Bridge is approximately situated. Discoveries and dedication to St Mildred suggest the new layout was planned by Ealdwulf and his son Ethwald from 664 to 749, and this street plan survives today in modern Ipswich. It is one of the oldest post-Roman street plans to survive anywhere in Europe. And we just walk around the town oblivious to these facts. So how lucky are we that we can just walk around it and amongst it, and it's the oldest in Europe. There are lots of cafes and coffee shops along here. So if you are in need of refreshment, there's certainly no limit to the places that you can visit to stop for a spot of lunch or a quick refreshment. Both the wharf, and for those who are not aware, wharf is actually short for warehouse at riverfront, and the town remained in continuous use and occupation since that time. In 991, a fleet of 93 Viking ships swept up the Orwell and stacked at the port. Can you imagine being here and seeing 93 ships coming down? In 1066, the Norman conquest brought Roger Bigod to Ipswich. He established Bigod's Quay. His stone building stood out. He had a house that was located on Quay Street. This was when the river was much wider. The Bigod family also have ties to Bungay Castle, something we'll touch on in a later walk through this historic town. During the period, this was termed as the Port of Orwell and was situated where Landguard Fort sits, stretching out towards Harwich. The waterfront now displays the wet dock and Haven Marina, which you can see in the distance here. Both yachts and power boats now dock here, and the waterfront is now more vibrant and trendy and a far cry from its days of yesteryear. So as we wander along here to Neptune Quay, you'll be able to see a variety of modern and colourful buildings. These are popping up here, and the brightly coloured university campus of University of Suffolk. This has been a great success, and it has more than doubled its student intake, which is great not only for Ipswich but also for East Anglia as well. I am going to cover some information about some of the buildings along the waterfront. The Salthouse Harbour Hotel, not a modern but modernised building. This building has an interesting story. Founded in 1899 by British Oil and Cake Mills of London, who took over several smaller oil and cake mills to become BOCM. By 1914, they were manufacturing linseed, cottonseed, rapeseed and feed cakes for animals. In 1916, acquiring John Robertson and Co. of Bristol. These lovely waterfront apartments have been up for at least 20 years now, and although they're lovely, I mean, look at the view. Although on Ipswich days and event days, I can imagine it's quite noisy along here. There's lots of cafes, and it's really lovely to sit out here and let the cobwebs blow away. So it's sort of a double-edged sword, really. As we approach the Salthouse Harbour Hotel, which you can see on the right hand side here, we can see its juxtaposition between the old and the new building, where they've added on to the side. By 1925, Lever Brothers, the manufacturers of New Pin soap, purchased BOCM. Paul Agriculture, which was founded in Ipswich in the 19th century, who initially traded in malt and barley for brewing, expanded its trading into corn and other animal feeds. In 1992, Unilever sold BOCM Silcock to form BOCM Paul Limited. The company is now owned by Four Farmers Limited, and they are based in the Netherlands. You can see that juxtaposition there with the old and the new. Let's have a look down the side alleys and have a wander. There are lots of nooks and crannies in this town that you need to pop down and have a look. Lever Brothers became Unilever in 1929, who amalgamated with Margarine Unie, a Dutch company, after which they began margarine and soap manufacturing. As we look down here, you can see the rear of the Salthouse Harbour Hotel, and I've never actually noticed that these windows at the rear had been bricked up. Now this alley seems to come out onto 4th Street. It's lovely to see how these buildings are being reused and repurposed. And nice how that young man ducked his head because he could see I was filming. Now this Margarine Unie company, manufacturing margarine and soap, I often wonder what would happen if somebody pulled the wrong lever. We haven't mentioned John Goodman and Son, whose name stands proudly above the door. John was a Scarborough lad. He left home at age 11 in 1813 on the sailing brig, the British Volunteer, where he began his life in shipping and the sea. John gained his master's certificate over the next 20 years, trading in the Baltic, the White Sea and the Mediterranean. Now the Salthouse Harbour Hotel is open for business, so just going to have a little wander here and see what other details we can see. You can see that the windows on the side are still open. So it's just the rear of the building that has been blocked up. I often wonder why. I do love to see the ghost signs on the side of the buildings. It's always sort of remnants of days gone by. In 1833, John set up his office in Hull and founded John Good and Son as a ship chandler, agent and broker. In 1864, when John retired, his two sons expanded into ship ownership and passenger services. The company continued for over 100 years. The business continues today and is still family owned. The GCB on the signs refers to General Cargo Brokers, which was wholly owned by John Good in 1974. The GCB added to the original sign in 1965. The hotel opened in 2003 and its modern extension, which was built on the J.D. Whitmore site. The Salt House name derives itself from the salt office, as huge quantities of salt were brought into port from Tyne in the early 1700s. Salt, which was also brought in from Cheshire salt mines, was used for cattle licks by the tanners in the preservation of hides. The Isaac Lord complex of buildings is named after Isaac Lord, who purchased the buildings from the Cobbold family in the 1900s. In the 1930s, coal and corn were traded out front. I do love the diverse trades. The buildings in this complex date from the 15th to the 19th century period. And I bet you're not thinking anything about that while you're drinking a nice cold beer on a sunny day. The pods that were erected during the COVID period have been successful, so they haven't been removed. The sale room is where medieval wool and fabric trading took place and dates back to when it was one of the 4 authorised wool centres in East Anglia. There is a nod to the industry in one of the panels that adorn Ancient House, which is in the town centre, and I also cover that on another walk through the town centre. So if you wanted to know more about that, you can certainly have a look. During the Cobbold years, the room was used to dry malt. The kiln is now the pub and has been since 1984. I've spent many an afternoon in here watching live music, and it is a very pleasant environment. The machinery room houses the machines and mills used for brewing and feeding horses for the Tolly Cobbold group back in the day. It is still in working order and dates back to the 18th century. The courtyard bar still shows the dipped contour, the cut that connected the warehouse to the river, of course originally much deeper and filled with water. The Viking mariners, now the Mariners, launched in 1899 and was commissioned for the Belgian state in the 1900s. After a series of duty, it was returned to its owners in 1945 and put back in service as Flandria the Seventh. In 1952, it was fitted as a Red Cross hospital ship and renamed the Florence Nightingale, and quite rightly so. In 1958, it was rebuilt and motorised and sold on. In 1970, it was sold as a party boat and operated as a party boat for some 18 years. Eventually, it was handed to Cont Ship Limited in 1990. It crossed the seas to Harwich. We can't see Harwich from here, but it is literally a stone's throw away. She is now moored in Ipswich dock. The ship was transformed into an Italian restaurant named Il Pinto, and in 2009 relaunched as Mariners, purchased in 2018 by chef Julien Jourdain, where it is today, and very successful it is too. You should most definitely come and give it a try. I'm going to backtrack along to Wherry Lane. Viking Mariners on the corner of Wherry Lane offer sailing and corporate hospitality on the River Orwell. Wherry Lane is a throwback to the days when the wherries operated out of Ipswich. These were small boats acting as ferries between Ipswich and Harwich. They carried passengers and parcels. And this is Wherry Lane right here. Wherry Lane is such a narrow thoroughfare, but importantly busy with the restoration and improvements on the waterfront. Look at the sarsen stones put in place along the wall base to protect the building from horses and carriages as they moved along this narrow lane. I'm going to walk down and turn around and come back. The only records are from paintings, and the boards here appear to be 20 feet in length with 2 masts and a fore and aft sail. The wherry's busiest times were during the wars with France, and it has been said that in 1793 wherries going downriver were so full people were left behind, even with as many as 20 to 30 boats leaving each day from Ipswich. If we look back between the building of Isaac Lord and the waterfront at the end of Wherry Lane, we can see the exposed noggin brickwork. that was used to fill the spaces between the studs and the frames. The diagonal pattern is very distinctive. There really are so many fascinating details around this town if you take the time to look up while you're walking around. I know it's easy to just bypass it if you live here and you frequent the waterfront. It's easy to just walk past. I mean, just looking at these old warehouse doors, no longer in operation, but they are still there for show because they are no doubt listed buildings. And majority of people that come to the waterfront now frequent this lane. And here you can see the Viking Mariners office right here on the corner of Wary Lane. And they offer the sailing and corporate hospitality on the River Orwell. And here we see the bistro on the quay. I have eaten here several times. I certainly can recommend it. There is no shortage of restaurants along the quay. And here, giving a nod to Maritime, Ipswich. Warehouses designed by H.R. Palmer, engineer of the wet dock, 1839 to 1842. If you love history, there's certainly no shortage of it if you're walking along this waterfront. This is where we're going to conclude part 1 of this walk on the historic waterfront. If you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in seeing more, especially part 2, please subscribe and you'll be notified when it's available.